What's up, guys? So today we're going to be talking about how the four market structures work. AJ is going to be talking about perfect competition and monopolistic competition. I'm going to be talking about oligopolies and monopolies. Alright, so let's get it going.
Alright kids, the first type of market structure is called perfect competition. Perfect competition consists of many small firms making identical products. These firms are price takers because if they raise their price above the market level at what is socially optimal for society, they won't sell at all. And if they lower it below that, they'll sell the same amount as they did before, therefore leading to decreased total revenue. These firms also have no need to advertise because they have identical products. There's no use in advertising an identical product. There's also low barriers to entry in a perfectly competitive firm because the many small firms allow other small firms to join and, add to the party. Alright, so here we have our regular graph for an industry with our supply curve, our demand curve, equilibrium quantity, and equilibrium price. Now this over here is the graph for a firm. You can see it's empty, but we're going to fill it in. So here we bring over this line, right? Continue this line over, and then make a straight line here. Now I bet you're wondering, AJ, what is this line called? I'm going to explain to you, and it's going to make no sense at all. So, this is our MR curve, but MR is also equal to demand. Since perfect competition, firms are price takers. It's also equal to AR and P because, once again, price takers, price is constant. This is our MR equals D equals AR equals P curve, also known as Mr. Dart. So now, we just continue the graph with an MC curve, and here, we put our average total cost. You can also put average variable cost below average total cost, but I'm not going to put that there because I'm lazy and I don't have enough time to film this entire video while still doing that. So don't worry about it. Don't. Now I bet you're wondering, where do we produce? You usually produce where MR equals MC. That would be right there. So there, you draw a straight line down and call that your equilibrium quantity. This is an example of a perfectly competitive firm in the short run. How do you move it to long run to consider long run benefits? In long run, MR needs to equal minimum ATC, which is just about there, right? So, problem is, how do we move our Mr. Dart curve to get to that point? Well, to help you draw this graph, I'm going to start it in reverse. The new Mr. Dart graph needs to be right there. So we're going to draw Mr. Dart, and then put a 1 on it to signify that it's different from the first. Therefore, the next equilibrium price, or as I'm going to call it, P1, needs to be there. In order to shift to this point, you need to move the supply curve to the right. The demand curve isn't being affected. The supply curve is. The new supply curve is going to be located there. There is your new quantity. And there is also your new firm quantity. This is a perfectly competitive firm in long run. So here you can see that I've now added the ABC curve to the graph, and that I've moved Mr. Dart down even further. You can notice now that it's below minimum ABC. This is the shutdown point. The shutdown rule states that if a firm is producing at MR equals MC below minimum ABC, it must shut down. That's it, right? Okay, cool. Welcome to monopolistic competition. I forgot to erase this. And we're back with monopolistic competition. Monopolistic competition is like a monopoly, which Aidan is going to talk about later in the video. Monopolistic competition has characteristics of both monopolies and perfect competition, one of which I just talked about and did a pretty decent job of. Like perfect competition, monopolistic competition has many small firms, low barriers to entry, and zero economic profit in the long run. In monopolistic competition, goods are not identical. Firms now seek to capture a piece of the market by making unique goods. And since these products now have substitutes, we use something called Non-price competition. I'm gonna edit in like text as I point my fingers, and it's gonna be like really cool looking. Watch. Non-price competition is stuff like advertising, which firms can use to increase demand. Now it's time to draw a graph for monopolistic competition. So here we have price and quantity. Let's start by drawing the demand curve. Then the marginal revenue curve, which goes below zero at a point in the graph. Next, we're going to draw our ATC. Let's place it here. That looks good to me. But we also can't forget our marginal cost curve, which we're going to place there. There are three different quantities in which you can produce on this graph. MR equals MC, MC equals D, and ATC equals D. This is the free market quantity. This is the socially optimal quantity. And this is the fair return quantity. Now, you move all these up to D to get your prices. That was really good. Free market price, socially optimal price, and fair return price. That's about it.
Scooby-Doo.
What the frick? Oh my god, get out of here.
No, we have to watch this.
No, I gotta
That's
finish.
Scooby-Doo,
Bro,
dude.
I don't care.
Hurry up.
I gotta Scooby-Doo do my thing.
Third market structure.
This is so stupid.
Third market structure, oligopolies. First thing with oligopolies, there's 10 or less firms, but more than one, because if there was one firm, it would be a monopoly, not an oligopoly. Second thing, there's either identical or differentiated products. Because there's more than one firm, the products could be differentiated, but because there's so few, they could be identical. With oligopolies, it really does not matter. There's high barriers to entry in oligopolies because each firm is super big and there's so few, it's extremely hard to enter the market. Oligopolies also have a ton of control over the price, so they're price makers because each firm has such a big portion of the market because there's less than 10. And then last thing with oligopolies is they are mutually interdependent, which basically means they can work together or collude and become a monopoly. All right, that's the characteristics of an oligopoly. Now let's talk about game theory. All right, basically we're back with a payoff matrix to help explain game theory. And this is basically the prisoner's dilemma. Prisoner 1, AJ, prisoner 2, Mr. Clifford. So they're both convicted of Grand Theft Auto and they're being charged with armed robbery. So if they both deny the armed robbery charge, they're going to get the 5 years in prison for Grand Theft Auto. Now, let's say AJ completely throws Clifford under the bus. Not only would Clifford never make an economics video again, which would be horrendous, but also Clifford would get like 20 years in prison because he's going to jail for not only Grand Theft Auto, but also armed robbery. So let's say he gets 20 years now, and AJ basically got a plea deal, so he's going free because he threw Clifford under the bus. So AJ goes free. Now, let's say it's reverse. Nobody cares if AJ goes to prison for 20 years. So this one's probably the best because Clifford walks free to make economics videos once again. All right, so that's probably optimal for the rest of the world except AJ, which nobody cares about. All right, now they both confess. They're both gonna get more time in prison because neither of them got thrown under the bus. Basically, yeah, they're both going to jail for 10 years for both crimes. But they got a reduced sentence for the armed robbery because they did admit to it. All right, so this is the prisoner's dilemma. Basically, this explains game theory because when you have one firm making a choice, it does, in an oligopoly, it does really affect the profit and decision of the other firms just because there's so few of them. All right, that's game theory. That's just a game theory. All right, now we're back talking about the graphs of oligopolies. Now this is what happens when oligopolies don't collude, and this is called the kinky demand curve. Sorry, kinked demand curve. And that's because of this thing. So this is your demand, and you see it goes here, and then it goes boop, and it has this little kink right here. All right, now that causes the marginal revenue curve to be super weird. Like, look at this thing. You go here, and then it's like, it's constant this entire time. And then it goes back down. That's because in this entire range, if the oligopoly changes its price, then it's still going to be selling this output. So, basically, the oligopoly should not change their price if it's within this range. Otherwise, they won't be making profit. Alright, now that is the Kink's demand curve. Now, this is what happens when oligopolies do collude. This might look oddly familiar to something I'm going to be talking about later, which is the monopoly graph. And that's because when oligopolies collude, they're basically working as one firm, so they're literally a monopoly just with multiple firms. And collusion is usually illegal because of this, and because monopolies are usually illegal. So basically this is pretty much never going to happen, because it's really not fair, because look how high this price is for how little output they're selling. In a perfectly competitive market, you would be producing this quantity with this price. So basically, colluding oligopolies and monopolies produce too high of a price at too low of an output, so this graph sucks. Alright, that is it for oligopolies. This is what happens when they collude, and yeah, time for monopolies. Boom, graph's gone, magic. Alright, dope. Now, characteristics of monopolies. There's only one firm, believe it or not, because that's what a monopoly is, one firm. Alright, extremely high barriers to entry, because you can't enter a monopoly, otherwise then it's not even a monopoly anymore, so it's really impossible to enter. Alright, now, they are price makers because they are the entire firm, so basically they can choose almost any price they want, but to make the most profit they choose the price that will be on the graph later. Okay, I forgot the rest of the characteristics of monopolies, so let me look at it. Monopolies, really cool. There's only one firm, extremely inefficient because, as I said earlier, they produce too little and charge too much. Now, characteristics, there's high barriers to entry because there's one firm, they're the entire market. It's pretty much impossible to enter the market. Okay, now, they're also price makers for the same reason, because they are the entire firm, they can pretty much choose any price they want, and because of they're also price makers because they have an extremely unique good with no close substitutes. So really, if you want to buy that good, you're buying it from them. Alright, that's characteristics of monopoly. Now, moving on to the graphs. Alright, welcome back. This is the first graph I want to talk about with monopolies. This shows where monopolies want to produce. So where MR hits 0 is the line that separates where monopolies' demand is elastic and inelastic. One thing with monopolies is they will only produce an elastic range, just because that's how they are, because otherwise MR is going to be less than 0, so that's no good. Okay, so yeah, this is where MR is, or total revenue is at its peak when MR is 0, so it's pretty cool. This is, so basically they're only going to produce over here. Dope. Moving on. We're back once again. Does this not look familiar? Well, it should, because if you're paying attention, this is the same as the colluding oligopoly graph. Now, this is actually a monopoly, not a colluding oligopoly, even though they're the same. Cool, am I right? Alright, now, a monopoly will want to produce where MR equals MC, and then you go down, get quantity, right? Alright, but, interesting thing with this and the colluding oligopoly is that you don't actually charge where MR equals MC because there's this deficit, the MR in demand, or marginal revenue in demand. So you actually go up to demand and charge this super high price right here, and where MR hits MC is actually your price cost. So all of this is your profit, so you're making a ton of profit, right? Alright, exactly, that is the point of monopolies. They want to make lots of profit, they don't care about consumer surplus. Now we're going to talk about why there's a deficit between demand and marginal revenue. And now we're going to talk about why there's a deficit between demand and marginal revenue. And this is actually because you have to raise price to sell more. So in a perfectly competitive firm, you have your flat demand, Mr. Darp, you have Mr. Darp and it's flat, right? So you don't have to raise price to sell more. Crazy. But here you do have to raise price to sell more, so your marginal revenue is actually going to be less than your demand. Boom, done. Now, this is a funny looking graph, isn't it? Because demand does equal MR. Crazy. You know why? This is a price discriminating monopoly. Basically, monopolies like to discriminate because they make more money. Basically, price discriminating monopoly is where they can charge different people different prices. So one person, if they're willing to buy it for $1, they'll do that. If one person is willing to buy it for $2, they'll buy that product for $2, and that's what this guy shows. This entire area that I've shaded in That's the price. Anywhere in here could be the price. So this makes a ridiculous amount of profit. There is no consumer surplus in a price discriminating monopoly because the consumer buys it for as much as they're willing to pay, not for how much the monopoly is charging, because they're charging all of this price. It's insane. I know. Boom. That's monopolies, boys.